"Mommy, there are bunny-shaped pancakes," she squealed. Claire sat up, her heart sinking by habit, checking if her daughter was wheezing, checking if an asthma attack had come back. But Ella was fine, healthy, rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed, clutching a paper napkin printed with stars. Sophie appeared in the doorway, yawning, her eyes still alert like a guard. She already ate breakfast. Nothing weird, except she's calling the boss Alex like they're super close. Claire shot her sister a look, but she couldn't fire back, because it was weird. Claire walked downstairs into the kitchen. The kitchen here was as big as a dream Claire had never dared to have. The smell of melted butter, chamomile tea, and toasted bread. The chef, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled warmly and set another plate of fruit on the table. Nadia stood nearby and asked Claire if she wanted coffee or tea. And Adrian was sitting at the far end of the table. Not the boss sits at the head while everyone stands kind of sitting. He sat like a man trying to learn how to have a family without turning it into a machine. His sleeves were rolled up. A white ceramic mug sat in front of him. He looked up as Claire entered, his gaze pausing for 1 second on her face, like a silent check. "Are you okay?" "Good morning," he said. Claire nodded, then pulled out a chair and sat beside Ella. She still wasn't used to it. It still felt like she was sitting inside a painting that didn't belong to her. Adrian didn't talk much. He let Ella talk nonstop, about the pancakes, about the garden, about today I want to have another tea party, about the yellow butterflies she'd seen outside the window. Claire waited for him to give gifts, to buy them, but Adrian only listened. Occasionally he answered with a short sentence at the right moment, like someone learning a child's language through patience. After breakfast, Claire stood at the staircase, holding the old bag that had been with her for years. She took a deep breath. "I'm going to class." Sophie immediately stepped closer. "Are you sure? What if out there?" "I have to go," Claire said, her voice firm. "I've missed too many days." Adrian appeared behind them. He didn't jump into the argument. He only said what needed saying. "The car is waiting at the gate." He paused. "With a driver?" Claire turned. "I don't need a driver." "I know," Adrian replied, "but you're going, and you're coming back. And I want to be sure of that." "So you're sending someone to follow me," Claire said, her eyes narrowing. "Protection," Adrian corrected calmly. "Not surveillance." Claire gave a dry laugh. "Your words are always so pretty." Adrian didn't deny it. He only added, as if setting a boundary for himself. "The guard will keep a distance. He won't enter the campus. He won't talk to your classmates. He won't show himself to you unless there's danger." Claire hated the feeling, hated the invisible shadow always traveling with her. But when she stepped outside, saw the black car waiting, and remembered the last time she'd gone to class, when she'd had to leave in the middle because Ella had an asthma attack and she didn't have money for medicine, she felt that hatred weaken, not disappear, just weaken. She got into the car. In the rearview mirror, she saw another vehicle far behind, a silent black streak on the road. Protection, not surveillance. The phrase still bothered her. But today, for the first time in years, she sat up straight, looked at the doors of her school, and didn't have to think the familiar question. Where will the money come from tomorrow to buy my child's medicine? For the first time, Claire got to go to class. Just to learn. Nursing school didn't get easier just because her life had changed. The sharp scent of antiseptic was still harsh. Exams still made her head spin. A few classmates' curious stares still clung to her. Because she'd disappeared for so long and then returned, dressed cleaner, eyes still tired but carrying something that wasn't desperation anymore. Claire tried not to think about the mansion, not about the black cars, not about the man who could reset her life with a few phone calls. She buried herself in books, in heart and lung models, in questions about medication, emergency care, how to keep someone alive in the moment they think they're dying. Ironically, it was here, in a class about saving people, that Claire realized she had spent years living just to survive. When she got home, the afternoon was already fading. She stepped into the living room and stopped in the doorway. Ella was hosting a tea party. A tiny table, shiny plastic cups. A teddy bear was seated neatly like a VIP guest. And Adrian was sitting across from Ella, back straight, feet placed properly, holding a toy teacup between two fingers, like a gentleman in a palace. Ella stared at him seriously. Alex, you have to drink it all. You're not allowed to refuse a guest. Adrian nodded, even more serious than a preschool teacher. I understand. Then he lifted the cup to his lips and took a very proper sip of nothing. Claire, who was used to pressing her lips together to keep from crying and grinding her teeth to keep from collapsing, suddenly laughed. The sound escaped so unexpectedly that she slapped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. It rang out in this wide, cold house like a sunbeam landing in the wrong place, and that made it even more precious. Ella whipped around, eyes blazing. Mommy laughed. Mommy, come drink tea with me. Claire stepped in, her heart softening a little. Adrian looked up at her. In his eyes was something strange, as if he'd just seen a door open. Not a mansion door, but Claire's door. You're back, he said, his voice low. Yeah, Claire replied, still tasting laughter in her throat. I'm back. That moment made the house feel less cold for real, not because of money, not because of power, just because a serious man was drinking pretend tea, and a woman laughed for the first time without forcing it. That night after Ella fell asleep, Adrian called Claire into his office. There was no interrogation atmosphere, no sit down, just an envelope placed neatly on the desk, like a gift without wrapping paper. Adrian slid the envelope toward Claire. What is this? Claire asked. Transfer paperwork, Adrian said, tuition, and a scholarship. Claire opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly from tension. The documents were clear, legal, and stamped. The scholarship recipient's name was Claire Bennett. No Karpenko Foundation. No bragging stamp that said I'm funding you. No Mrs. Karpenko. Claire looked up, her eyes sharp. Why are you doing this? Adrian met her gaze. I don't want you to owe me. Claire clenched the papers. Then what do you want? Adrian leaned back in his chair, silent for a beat, as if he understood she would keep asking that until the answer was real enough. I want you to stand on your own, he said slowly, so that if one day you leave me, you'll still be standing. The words went through Claire like numbness, because it didn't sound like a man trying to keep her. It sounded like a man preparing for the possibility that she would go. You, Claire started, then stopped. She didn't know what to call this feeling, gratitude, fear, or both. She looked down at the envelope in her hands, at her name printed clearly, at a future opening like a door she had never believed she deserved. Then she looked up and asked the question she'd been trying to avoid for weeks, afraid the answer would ruin everything. So what do you really want from me? And Adrian looked at her, his eyes darkening slightly. Not dark like a threat, but dark like something real he had held back for far too long. Claire held the envelope like it could slice her skin. The smell of new paper, fresh ink, the smell of a future, all of it made it hard to breathe. Because since when could her life be neatly stacked into a file this clean? And since when did a man powerful enough to bend other people's fates say, I don't want you to owe me? Claire stared at Adrian for a long time. The warm yellow light in his office washed over the high bridge of his nose, the hard line of his jaw, eyes dark as a moonless night. But what made her shiver wasn't the coldness. It was the restraint, like a hunting animal that knows how to sit still. What do you want from me? Claire asked again, slower this time, sharper. Don't go in circles. Don't say peace. Don't say protection. What do you want? Really? Adrian didn't smile, didn't dodge, didn't use sweet words. He stood and came around the desk, but stopped at a distance that kept Claire from feeling cornered. A step Claire realized he'd trained into instinct, close enough to tell the truth, not close enough to press. I want a family, Adrian said. His voice was low and even, like setting a stone on the ground. A home with the sound of a child in it, a woman who doesn't shake in fear when she hears a car stop outside the gate. Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. You picked wrong. I shake because of you. Adrian nodded, accepting it outright. I know. And you still did it. Claire's voice rose. You showed up at the church like some savior. You put a ring on my finger. You brought me into your house. You dash. And I signed a clause that lets you leave, Adrian cut in, not harshly, just stating a fact. I gave you a phone to call a car to take you away. I left the doors unlocked. You call that freedom? Claire tightened her grip on the envelope. The paper crackled. Freedom inside a frame you built ahead of time? Adrian's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't react like a man who'd been insulted. He reacted like a man who understood she was hurting. In my world, he said slowly, love is a weakness people snap in half. You love someone. You get blackmailed through that person. I've seen too much. Claire looked at him, her chest heavy like something was pressing down. So you chose an arrangement? Yes, Adrian said. A clean arrangement to start with. No dreamy promises. No fantasies. No buying it with coercion. Claire scoffed. No coercion? What do you call the church? For the first time, Adrian stayed silent longer than a beat. That silence wasn't calculation. It felt like swallowing his pride. That was coercion, he said at last. I won't deny it. Claire froze. She'd been ready to hear excuses, to hear I had no choice, to hear him blame Ryan, blame circumstances, blame the world. But Adrian took it head on. No denial, no cover. Then why? Claire asked, her voice rough. If you knew it was wrong, why did you still do it? Adrian looked straight at her, and in that moment Claire realized he was choosing something harder than power, choosing honesty. Because I wanted you alive, he said, and because I wanted you in my life. The words landed like a hot touch in the center of Claire's chest. Not romantic, not flowery, but enough to make her furious and unsettled. She slapped the envelope down on the desk. And the way you tracked me, Claire snapped, like an arrow that had been lodged in her throat for too long. Just say it. You knew Ella liked purple. You knew I drink chamomile tea when I'm anxious. You knew I'm in nursing school. You knew. Wrong, Adrian said immediately, decisive. You're right. It was wrong. Claire shot to her feet. Tracking me was wrong. Yes. Adrian nodded. No dodging. But I didn't touch your life. I didn't make you lose your job. I didn't arrange for Ryan to get close to you. I didn't control you. You still watched, Claire's voice grated. You took pieces of my life like they were items you could collect. Adrian didn't soften to beg. His gaze only went deeper, like a man placing his hand on his own fracture. I watched to know what you needed, he said, and to know you were a good person. Claire went rigid. A good person? You could have chosen the easy way, Adrian said, his voice low. You could have found a man to lean on. You could have used pity. You could have so many things. But you chose 2 jobs. You chose night classes. You chose to keep Ella with your own strength. He paused, weighing each word so it wouldn't turn into flirting. I respect that, Adrian said. I want someone like that. Claire listened, and something inside her felt strange, like being seen through, like someone touching a place no one touched. Only it was done with eyes. She stepped forward closer, directly facing him, not to be pressed, but to place herself in the heat on her own terms. Listen, Claire said, low but sharp as a blade. I'm not something you want the way you want a rare object. I'm a mother. I have a child. I have boundaries. If you do anything that makes me feel like my life is being controlled, I will leave. Adrian held her gaze without blinking. Then he nodded slowly. Reset the boundaries, he said. I'm listening. Claire exhaled hard. You agree? I agree, Adrian said. Then he added, his voice like a declaration that didn't need witnesses. I want you to respect me because I deserve it, not because I'm frightening. That stopped Claire in place. A crime boss, a man who could silence an entire church, was saying he didn't want respect built on fear. Claire didn't know how to respond to a man like that, a man who did wrong and admitted it, dangerous yet disciplined, possessive yet trying, to learn how not to suffocate with that possession. The air between them heated up. Not the heat of a fight, the heat of 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong step and they fall. And they were trying not to fall. Claire turned away, walking a few steps just to get air back into her lungs. And right then, Nadia's voice called from the hallway, more urgent than usual. Miss Claire. Claire spun around. What? Nadia looked pale. Ella, she's hot. She has a fever. Claire's heart dropped straight into her stomach. She bolted into the hallway like she'd been yanked. Her whole body flipped into survival mode. Check the forehead, check the lips, check the breathing. Ella lay curled under the purple blanket, face flushed, eyes wet, lips trembling. Mom, Ella whimpered. Claire wanted to cry, to scream, to slam doors. In her life, a fever was always the start of long nights. The hospital, the bills, the medicine, the fear of what if it gets worse. Adrian appeared behind her. No orders, no wasted questions. He set a box of medicine, a thermometer, and a bottle of water on the bedside table. I called a doctor, he said. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Claire whirled, about to explode. Don't you? I'm not touching her, Adrian cut in, voice low and steady. You do. I'll stand here. Claire faltered. True, he didn't step closer. He held the distance, like he remembered every rule he'd set. The doctor arrived, examined Ella, and said it was just a viral fever. Reduce the fever, monitor her, and keep her hydrated. Claire still trembled with the memory of poverty, because every time her child got sick, her life felt like a rope pulled tight. When the doctor left, Claire sat beside the bed, wiping sweat from Ella's forehead, whispering, soothing, counting breaths like counting life. She heard footsteps behind her. Adrian stood at the doorway, not entering. Not because he was afraid, because he was waiting. He looked at Claire, asking one question with his eyes. May I? Claire swallowed hard. She didn't want to let him step into the most intimate part of her world, but she was also exhausted, and Ella was whispering, thirsty. Claire gave a small nod, just a small nod. Adrian entered like a man walking into a church, light, quiet, touching nothing that wasn't his. He picked up the glass of water, handed it to Claire, then knelt on the opposite side of the bed, keeping distance. Ella's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and found him. Alex, she murmured. Adrian answered, his voice deep but gentle. Yeah, I'm here. Ella winced. I'm hot. I know, Adrian said, but you'll be okay. Claire watched that and felt her heart tighten, because Adrian didn't overdo it. He didn't perform being a hero. He simply showed up at the right time, in the right place, like a quiet wall. A little later, Ella fell asleep again, breathing more evenly. Claire stood to grab a cold cloth. When she turned back, she saw Adrian had lifted Ella, carefully like she was something so precious that even holding her too firmly would be a sin. Ella's head rested on his shoulder, her small hand gripping the collar of his white shirt. Adrian's face in that moment was different. No longer the face of a boss giving orders, no longer the coldness of a man who controlled the world, just a man looking at a child as if he wanted to protect him with his whole life. And that softening was the most dangerous thing of all. Dangerous to Claire's heart. She stood in the doorway, still holding the cloth, eyes burning without understanding why. Because there are moments that make you forget you're supposed to stay guarded. And Claire had just seen one. The second month arrived as if by habit, not crashing in like a storm, not blazing like an escape. It came in tiny things, things Claire had never dared to believe she could have. Dinner at a normal hour, Ella's homework not left unfinished because her mother had to rush to a shift, sleep that wasn't jolted awake by debt collectors calling. Family didn't form through vows, it formed through rhythm. At night, the three of them ate together. Ella told stories from school. Now she had a tutor, reading assignments, naive questions falling like rain. Adrian listened as if it were the most important briefing of his life. Some nights Ella made him do a princess voice while reading a story, and Claire had to turn her face away so she wouldn't laugh, because a boss doing a princess voice was genuinely an unbelievable image. Claire began to realize Adrian didn't love with grand displays. He loved by showing up at the right time. Not this is a gift, but this is what she needs. Not I'll handle everything, but keep studying. And somewhere in the quiet spaces, those things settled inside Claire, like salt dissolving in water. You couldn't see it, but it changed the taste. She started remembering things about him, not because she tried, because her brain recorded them on its own. Adrian hated noise when he was thinking. When he handled work, if someone spoke too loudly, he didn't yell. He simply went quiet. But that silence was enough to make an entire room lower its voice. And Adrian remembered how Claire took her coffee. No sugar. Add milk. And if Claire was tired, she would grip the cup tightly, as if the heat inside it were the only thing keeping her together. One morning, Claire came down to the kitchen and saw a cup of coffee already waiting, exactly that way. No one said, "I made it." No one took credit. There was only the coffee and a small note. "It's cold today. Wear something warm." Adrian's handwriting was sharp and neat, like an order, but the sentence itself was like a hand blocking the wind. Sophie saw it and shot Claire a look that said, "Don't soften." Claire glared back, but she couldn't deny that somewhere inside her, something was easing. Then came the hospital fundraiser. Claire got an email from school. The hospital was hosting a fundraising night for a pediatric treatment support fund, and Claire's class had been assigned to help. She was both excited and afraid, because it was a place full of people with status. Doctors, donors, administrators, people who spoke in the language of confidence. She had been in places like that once, the day she met Ryan. She had thought she'd finally made it, and then she'd been left behind like a joke. When Claire told Adrian, he didn't ask, "Do you need me to go with you?" like a favor. He only said one sentence as if it were an obvious truth. "You're going with me." Claire frowned. "I'm going because of class, not because of you." Adrian nodded. "Exactly. But that night, you'll be seen as my wife. I'm not letting you stand alone." Claire wanted to argue, but "I'm not letting you stand alone" hid a fear she kept well hidden. The fear of being judged, being looked down on, being seen as a woman who was picked up rather than a woman with worth. That night, Claire wore a simple dark blue dress, not too expensive, not too showy. She wanted to look like Claire, not Mrs. Karpenko. Adrian appeared in a black suit, collar neat, hair combed back. He looked at her for a beat, then said exactly one word. "Beautiful. Not beautiful because I chose it. Not beautiful because you're mine. Just beautiful, like acknowledgement." In the car, Claire was quiet. Her hands were cold. Adrian looked at the hand tightening around her small clutch. He didn't touch her. He only lowered his voice. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to smile. You just have to look at me. I'll handle it." Claire snapped, "I don't need you to handle anything." Adrian nodded, as if he'd expected it. "Yeah, but I'll still be there." The hospital that night was brightly lit. The grand lobby was full of laughter, glasses clinking, sparkling dresses, and handshakes that smelled like power. Claire stepped in and felt like she was back in the church that day. Except here, people didn't whisper openly. They looked with their eyes, with polite smiles, with the quick sweep of assessment. She could feel the unspoken questions. Who is she? His wife? A lucky girl? Adrian didn't pull her against him to mark her. He walked beside her, close enough that she wouldn't get lost, far enough that she wouldn't become an accessory. When people greeted Adrian, he didn't introduce Claire as my wife first. He said, "Claire, she's studying nursing. She works directly with pediatric cases. She's here because this fund matters to her." Claire froze, not because of the introduction, but because he put her work ahead of her title. During the fundraiser, a department head asked Claire why she had chosen the field. Claire answered with the truth, no polish. "Because I was once a mother who didn't have money to buy medicine. I don't want anyone to feel that." The room paused for a beat. Then the people nearby went quiet. Not quite out of pity, quiet because they heard something real. Claire didn't know if she had just shone or just exposed a wound. But Adrian stood behind her, didn't cut in, only let her speak. And when she finished, he gave the smallest nod as if saying, "You did well." A man in a tuxedo, half drunk and half arrogant, laughed. "Oh, so your wife is the lucky Cinderella type, huh? Meet the right guy and your whole life changes." Claire felt her cheeks burn. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part wanted to slap him. Adrian turned to the man, his expression calm in a way that was terrifying. But his voice didn't rise. "No," Adrian said. "She's good, and she did it herself." That was all. No intimidation, no show of power, no mention of organizations, no mention of money. Just one sentence placing Claire exactly where she deserved to stand. Claire turned away quickly because her eyes went red without warning. She was used to men protecting her by making her smaller. "Stay behind me, I'll handle it." But Adrian protected her by putting her where she belonged. She did it herself. And that sentence made Claire's heart vibrate like a string that had just been plucked. On the way home, Claire sat silent as if holding something tight in her chest so it wouldn't break. The car moved through dark roads. City lights slid across the windows like long streaks of stars. When the car stopped at the mansion gate, Claire got out first. Cold wind hit her face, but the heat inside her chest remained. Adrian followed. He was about to ask, "Are you okay?" Like always. But Claire didn't give him the chance. She turned, stepped forward, and hugged him. Quick, clumsy, like a touch that wanted to run away. It wasn't a lover's embrace. It was a reflex. Thank you without wanting to say it. Adrian's body went rigid for a thousandth of a second, not from discomfort, but because he was restraining the instinct to respond. He didn't squeeze. He didn't pull her back. He didn't take advantage. He just stood still and asked softly right by her ear, his voice deep like it brushed the edge of her skin, "Are you okay?" That question broke Claire's defenses because it said he didn't treat the hug as a right. He treated it as a choice, and he was still asking permission, even though she was his legal wife on paper. Claire let go, breathing hard. She looked up. The porch light lay a strange warmth over Adrian's eyes. He stood there, waiting, not moving closer. Claire felt her heart rush into dangerous territory, the territory of what she didn't want to admit, that she was starting to want to be close to him, not because of money, not because of safety, but because he respected her so much that she felt like she was a person again. Claire rose onto her toes as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her lips came so close to his that she could feel his breath, warm and restrained. And right then, fear surfaced. Fear that if she kissed him, she would owe him. Fear that if she kissed him, she would belong to him. Fear that if she kissed him, everything would never go back to the way it was. Claire stopped, stepped back, her eyes wide with the panic of someone who had just stood too close to the edge. Adrian didn't move. No smile, no anger, no, "Is that it?" He only looked at her and said one sentence, light as wind, but heavy with promise. "Whenever you're ready." Claire stood under the porch light, chest rising and falling, her skin still remembering the feel of her arms around him. And she understood. The most dangerous thing about this man wasn't his power. It was that he never forced a kiss, yet somehow made her want to give one willingly. Ryan came back on a day that felt almost ordinary. No gunshots, no black cars are parked outside the gate, no strange texts at midnight. Just an unknown number calling right after Claire got out of class. When she was standing under the school awning, arms full of clinical practice paperwork, her mind still carrying the lingering heat of when you're ready like a fresh burn. It rang 3 times. Claire almost declined, but something in her instincts made her answer. "Claire!" That voice, like an old smell rising from the bottom of memory. Not the smell of love, the smell of a wrong she once forgave herself for. Claire went still. "Ryan." "Heard you're doing well," Ryan said with a soft laugh. Except there was no joy in it. It had teeth. "Nice house, rich husband. That little girl must be treated like a princess." Cold crawled up Claire's spine. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter." Ryan's tone slid smoothly. "What matters is you still remember who I owe. And I also remember you're holding something I can use." Claire tightened her grip on the phone. "Don't mention Ella." "Oh, come on, why so tense?" Ryan exhaled like he was smiling. "I'm just talking. Adults talking to each other." Claire swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "I want you to tell Adrian," Ryan said casually, like he was asking a favor. "Tell him to stop. Tell him to give me a way out. Or you give me a little money. Not much. Just enough for me to disappear." Claire heard her heartbeat pounding in her ears, each thud hitting bone. No, she said without thinking. Ryan went quiet for a beat. Then his voice dropped lower. So you think Ella's safe? He asked. Claire, do you know where she goes to school? Do you know what time you're picking her up? Do you know she likes to stop at that pink candy machine on the corner? The blood in Claire's body turned to ice. He knew. The worst part wasn't the threat. It was the detail. You followed my child, Claire burst out, her voice cracking. I just care, Ryan said, innocent in a way that was sick. Because she's the best leverage to make you behave. Claire wanted to throw up. Her hand shook so hard the phone nearly slipped. Listen, Ryan continued, velvet soft and needle poisoned. You speak for me. You tell Adrian to let it go. Otherwise, she's little. She scares easily. One good cry and you'll melt. Claire bit her lip until she tasted blood. Don't call me again, she said, hoarse but steady. I'll call the police. Ryan scoffed. The police? You think the police can save you from your husband's world? Then he hung up. Claire stood frozen under the awning. Sunlight, people passing, everything normal. But inside her, something had just cracked. She didn't go home right away. She sat in her car, breathing hard, staring at the street like it was a painting that could suddenly catch fire. Ella, her baby. Claire took out the second phone, the one Adrian had given her. Her fingers shook, but this time she didn't hide. She called Adrian. He picked up almost immediately. Claire? Just hearing her name made her want to cry, but she swallowed it down. Ryan called me, Claire said. He brought up Ella. He knows her schedule. No swearing, no slammed desk. Only a brief silence. Very brief, like a metal door sealing shut somewhere. Where are you? Adrian asked. At school. Stay where you are. His voice was low, calm to the point of cold. A car is coming, not to take you away, to cover you. Claire shivered. Adrian, I don't want violence. I don't want blood. I hear you. No. Claire gripped the phone tightly. Do you hear me clearly? I want you to promise. Don't kill him. Don't let Ella see violence. Don't turn me into a mother who lives with blood on her hands. A beat of silence. Then Adrian said, each word distinct. I promise. No blood in front of the child, and no killing unless it's unavoidable. Unless it's unavoidable, stung, but Claire understood, within his world, that was the realest boundary he could offer. 10 minutes later, a car arrived. A guard stood at a distance, exactly as Adrian said, but their eyes swept the area constantly. War mode switched on, still trying to stay quiet. Claire was taken home. The mansion gates shut. Everything remained expensive and spotless, but the air felt weird. Adrian met her in his office. No suit, just a shirt with the cuffs undone. He looked her over from head to toe like he was checking whether someone had put hands on her. When he saw she was untouched, his eyes went darker. Not softer, just shifting into something else. What did he say? Adrian asked. Claire told him, forcing her voice to stay steady. Sophie stood nearby, face pale, gripping her phone like she was about to call the police herself. And when Claire repeated the part about the pink candy machine, Sophie swore out loud. Claire couldn't. She just felt skinned. Every one of Ella's little habits turned into a map for someone evil. Adrian listened without interrupting or showing much expression, but when Claire finished, he stood up, very slowly. What do you want? He asked Claire. Claire blinked. What? Do you want me to handle this my way? Adrian said. Or in a way you can live with? Claire stared at him. In that moment, she saw it clearly. He was handing her the decision. The way I can live with, Claire said instantly. I don't want Ella to know. I don't want this house to become a place my child is afraid of. Adrian nodded. Okay. Adrian handled it ruthlessly and cleanly. No guns, no kidnapping, no basement torture like the stories people whispered about men like him. He called his lawyer. He opened his laptop. He picked up the phone and spoke to someone in a language Claire didn't understand. But his tone stamped each word into place. Efficient, precise, no extras. 2 days later, Claire learned what ruthless really meant. Ryan's accounts were frozen. The money he'd hidden was traced through transaction chains, like a fish that thought it was swimming in darkness, never realizing there was a net under the water. A restraining order was filed. A legal warning was sent to the people who had helped Ryan hide. No one was beaten. No one's teeth were broken. But Ryan's entire system was choked so tightly he had to surface just to breathe. And Adrian didn't touch the innocent. Claire saw that clearly. When Sophie demanded in fury, "Why not teach him a lesson?" Adrian only said, "Because Claire asked me not to, and because Ella doesn't need to see evil to understand it exists." That shut Claire up, but it didn't calm her. It made her more afraid, because Claire began to see Adrian's real world, a world where law was a tool, finances a noose, and information a scalpel, a world that didn't need blood to ruin a life. One evening, Claire stood in the garden, looking at the lights in the trees, listening to the fountain. Ella was asleep. Everything was quiet. But inside Claire, nothing was. Adrian stepped out and stopped beside her, not touching her. Claire spoke, her voice small, like a confession. "I'm raising my child in this world." Adrian looked at her for a long time. He didn't deny it. He didn't say my world is good. He only spoke the truth, like a man who didn't know how to sugarcoat. "This world is dangerous," he said, "but it also has ways to protect." Claire turned to him, eyes red. "I don't want Ella growing up thinking protection means bodyguards, tracking, someone getting choked out because of one phone call." Adrian didn't argue. He drew a deep breath, then said something that made Claire go still, because she didn't expect him to say it. "If you want to leave," Adrian said, "you can." Claire froze. Adrian held her gaze, his voice low, steady, like a vow that didn't need a church to witness it. "But Ryan will never be able to touch you two again." The hook at the end of the chapter was right there, in a sentence that sounded like freedom and warning at the same time. And Claire realized her real choice was no longer a simple stay or go. It was whether she dared to believe that a man who started with an arrangement was now opening the door for her with freedom and still putting her safety above his own ego. There are cages made of gold, and there are cages made of kindness. Claire had thought if she were going to be kept, it would come with locks, with cameras, with words like, "You're not allowed to go anywhere." But for the past 2 months, what had held her wasn't something she could fight. It was the hardest thing to resist. A quiet house, a child who could sleep through the night, and a man who always asked, "Are you okay?" before touching anything that belonged to her. That night, after Adrian's words in the garden, "If you want to leave, you can," Claire barely slept. She lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside the window. Every time she closed her eyes, two images pressed over each other. Ella laughing in the purple room, and Ryan talking about the pink candy machine. Freedom, love. Sometimes those two things stand on opposite sides like two riverbanks. And Claire, who had spent her whole life swimming in cold water, suddenly found herself afraid of the shore she used to dream about. The next morning, Nadia told Claire that Adrian wanted to see her in his office. "There's a lawyer." Claire's heart jumped. She immediately imagined another set of papers, papers that would turn her into someone with no way out. Binding clauses, cold lines, traps written in legal language. She walked in with her body strung tight like a violin string. Adrian stood by the window in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. On the desk sat a thick file, a signing pen, and an older man, Attorney Harrington, sitting upright, his glasses set neatly as if his life consisted only of rules. Adrian turned. His eyes weren't cold. They didn't dodge. They were just serious. "Sit down," he said. Claire didn't sit immediately. "What are you planning to do?" Adrian didn't react to her sharpness. He only pulled out a chair for her, then sat across from her, not behind the desk like a boss. "This is a key," Adrian said. Claire frowned. Harrington slid the file toward her. "Mrs. Karpenko." "Claire," Claire cut in, her voice hard. "Call me Claire." Harrington paused, then nodded. "Claire, these are updated documents outlining your benefits and a safe exit option if you choose." Claire stared at Adrian like she couldn't believe him. "An exit option?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." Claire opened the file. Each page felt like a slap to the old picture in her head. A bank account in Claire's name, with access granted only to Claire. An education fund, also in Claire's name, not tied to Adrian, not forcing her to owe him. Written confirmation of her right to continue school, the right to choose her internship placement, and the right to work after graduation. A custody agreement, clear language protecting Claire as the primary guardian. And finally, an exit plan, a safe location, a route, a car, support personnel, an emergency contact list, and one single condition. If Claire chose to leave, Adrian would ensure Ryan and everyone connected to him could never touch her and her daughter again. Claire read, her hands turning cold. She looked up. This is real? Adrian met her gaze, his eyes deep and dark. It's real. Why? Claire asked, her voice nearly breaking. Why would you do this? Adrian went silent for a beat, as if the answer wasn't something he wanted to say, but something he had to say if he wanted her to believe him. Because I want you to stay, Adrian said, but I want you to choose. The words dropped into the office like an echo. Claire went rigid. In her world, when men wanted to keep someone, they usually used three things: money, promises, or fear. Adrian was doing the opposite. He was placing freedom on the table like a gift he knew could send her away. Claire shook her head. You're mafia. Adrian looked at her the way you look at a child asking about a storm. Yes. Mafia doesn't hand out keys, Claire said. They lock doors. Adrian exhaled. I've lived my whole life with locks. I don't want you living that way. Claire let out a strangled laugh. You talk like you're a good man. Adrian didn't claim he was good. He only said something Claire couldn't argue with. I'm a man who knows exactly where I was wrong. Harrington stood and excused himself, leaving the room to the two of them. When the door shut, the air softened, but it also became more exposed. Claire set the file down and looked at Adrian. If I leave, you'll really let me go? Adrian held her gaze without blinking. Yeah, Claire swallowed. And if I stay? Adrian didn't answer right away. He rose and stepped closer, close enough for Claire to feel his warmth, but still keeping the distance he always respected. If you stay, Adrian said, his voice low, I'll know it's because you want to, not because you're scared, not because you owe me. Claire's heart hammered like she'd been running. Real freedom was right here. But freedom was terrifying too, because if she chose to stay after being handed a key, she couldn't lie to herself and call it circumstance. She would have to name it love, or at least something growing into love. That afternoon, Claire went back to her room, her head still spinning. She passed Ella's common room and stopped. Ella was sitting on the floor, colored pencils scattered everywhere, lips pressed tight with concentration. She was making a card. What are you doing? Claire asked. Ella looked up, eyes bright. A card for our family. Claire froze. Our family? Yes. Ella nodded. My teacher said to draw your family. I drew Mommy, me, and Alex. Then Ella held the card up like a treasure. On the paper were 3 stick figures drawn in messy lines. One with long hair, Claire, one small, Ella, and one very tall figure colored in black, with a serious face but a little, small smile. Red hearts floated overhead, and a scribbled word, family. Claire's throat tightened. Had her life ever had family? Or had it only ever been the two of us in constant survival? Mommy, why are you crying? Ella asked, confused. Claire lifted a hand to her face and realized tears had already fallen. She knelt and hugged her. It's okay. Mommy is just happy. Ella hugged back, then whispered like a secret. Alex is good. Alex doesn't make Mommy cry. The sentence drove straight into Claire's heart, because Adrian had promised that exact thing. And so far he'd kept it, not with words, but with every action. Claire let Ella go, wiped her tears, and stepped into the hallway. She wanted air, wanted to escape the feeling of being soft. But the moment she stepped out, Adrian was already there. Like he always knew when she needed a quiet moment. He didn't ask what was wrong in front of Ella. He only looked at the card in her hand, then looked into her eyes. Claire couldn't speak. Her throat locked. Adrian didn't hug her. He didn't rush. He simply pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it. So ordinary it didn't make her feel pitied. Claire took it and wiped her eyes. A beat of silence. She heard her own heartbeat. "You don't have to answer right away," Adrian said softly. "That key will always be there." Claire looked at him. "Aren't you afraid I'll really leave?" Adrian smiled very faintly, like a crack in ice. "I am." Claire stilled. "But if I keep you with fear," Adrian continued, "then even if you stay, you won't belong to me. I want you to belong to yourself first." That made Claire feel like she might fold in half. Not because it was pretty, because it was true. Night fell. The house was quiet. Ella slept in the purple room. Sophie had gone to her room too, and Claire stood in front of the connecting door between her room and Adrian's. That door had always been there, like a symbol. For 2 months, Claire had walked past it the way you walk past a final boundary. She hadn't crossed it, not because she was afraid of Adrian, but because she was afraid of herself. Afraid that one step across would change the shape of everything. But today, after the card, after the file labeled freedom, after the sentence "I want you to choose," Claire realized she couldn't keep standing forever in the hallway of hesitation. Claire put her hand on the doorknob. The cold metal against her skin pulled her back into reality. She opened the door, not forcefully, not dramatically, just enough for the hinge to make a soft sound, like a confession. On the other side, Adrian's room was darker, deeper. Adrian was sitting in a chair near the window, shirt open at the collar, a book on his lap. He looked up at the sound. His expression turned alert immediately. Not alert with suspicion, but the alertness of someone afraid of making her uncomfortable. Claire stood in the doorway, heart pounding like a drum. She stepped in once, not out of duty, not because of paperwork, but because she wanted to say one sentence that, if she didn't say it, would keep her living in half-dark forever. The door between the two rooms opened with the softest sound, so soft that if Claire hadn't been stretched tight as a guitar string, she might have thought she imagined it, but it still echoed in her chest like a confession. Adrian looked up from the chair by the window. The dim light painted half his face in shadows, calm, controlled lines. He didn't spring to his feet. He didn't step toward her. He didn't do anything that might make Claire feel she'd just handed over control. He only looked at her the way you look at someone standing at the edge of the biggest decision of their life. "Ella's asleep," Claire said, her voice rough from spending all day biting down on every emotion. She stayed in the doorway for another beat, her hands still wrapped around the doorknob like it was her last exit. "I'm not coming in here out of obligation." Adrian nodded, slow and solid. "I know." Claire took one more step. The carpet was soft under her feet. His room smelled like wood and paper, a faint trace of his familiar cologne. But what made her shake wasn't the scent. It was the distance he kept. A powerful man who could take anything, choosing to sit still so she could come to him on her own. Claire set the freedom folder on the table by the door, like placing down a key that had kept her awake and unsteady all night. "You prepared an escape route for me," she said. "You told me I could leave." "Yes," Adrian answered, "if that's what you need." Claire stared straight at him, and her eyes no longer held pure fear, only the raw truth of a woman who'd lived too long in survival mode. "Do you know how much that scares me?" Adrian tilted his head slightly, a tiny gesture, like he was opening himself to hear it all. "What scares you?" "That if I stay," Claire said, each word like she was pulling it from her chest, "then this time, I won't have any excuse left to lie to myself." Adrian fell silent, not to avoid her. Silent like a man standing in front of something precious, afraid that one hard breath might break it. Claire inhaled deeply. She stepped closer, close enough to see his eyes clearly beneath the lamp. "I'm staying," she said. "I'm choosing to be with you." For a brief moment, Claire saw Adrian's shoulders tighten, a reflex, the instinct to hold on. But he restrained it immediately, the way he always did, like a reminder to himself. Claire continued, her voice steadier, her boundary as clear as a line drawn on paper. But I don't belong to you. I belong to myself. Adrian looked at her for a long time. And then, as if he'd waited his whole life to hear a sentence like that, he stood, unhurried, not pressing, only standing to meet her at eye level so his words wouldn't fall from above. And that, Adrian said, his voice low, unadorned, is why I love you. The word love dropped into the air like an oath. Not cheesy, not a fairy tale promise. It sounded like something measured in blood and discipline, spoken once and never taken back. Claire didn't know how to respond to a man saying love for the first time without demanding anything in return. Her eyes burned. Don't say that if you aren't sure. Adrian didn't hesitate. I'm very sure. Claire swallowed hard. For months, their contract had saved her. It had been a shield, something that let her breathe without fear of being swallowed whole. But now, if she'd stepped through this door on her own, she knew they couldn't keep calling it a contract. Not with the slow fire burning inside her. Then we start over, Claire said. Not a contract, a commitment. Adrian nodded. Tell me your conditions. Claire held his gaze, not looking away. Respect the boundaries, still. Ask before touching the important things, still. Let me study. Let me work. Let me raise my child the way I believe. And if there's a day I panic, you can't use power to force me to stay through fear. Adrian answered immediately, like stamping a seal onto it. I agree. Claire drew a breath, then said the last thing, the one that made her heart pound hard enough to hurt. And I want us to go very slowly, but no pretending. If we choose each other, it has to be real. Adrian's eyes darkened, not with possession, but something deeper he'd always tried to keep contained, the hunger to be chosen freely. Okay, he said, his voice rougher, slow, but real. Claire didn't know when she'd move closer. She only knew the distance between them suddenly felt thin as fog. She lifted her chin, and this time, for the first time, she didn't wait for him to ask with his eyes. She raised her hand and touched the collar of his shirt, feeling his heartbeat under the fabric. Adrian didn't pull her in right away. He kept the habit Claire both loved and ached over. He asked softly, as if afraid of snapping something fragile. Is this okay? Claire nodded. This time, she didn't tremble. She didn't retreat. She nodded like a woman signing her name to her own choice. The kiss that reached them wasn't a polite promise in a church. It was longer, warmer, full of breath and heartbeat and an admission they couldn't take back. Claire was the one who moved first, but Adrian kept the rhythm, like he always did with everything. Enough for her to feel safe, enough for her not to feel led. When their mouths parted, Claire could still hear Adrian breathing. He rested his forehead against hers for a beat, as if he needed to confirm she was still here. Still Claire, still the woman who belonged to no one but herself. That night, they were no longer two rooms connected by a door left slightly open. They were two people who had chosen each other with clear eyes. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, out of trust. And when things went further, they were guided by small questions and unmistakable nods. Enough for Claire to understand. This man's love always began with respect. The next morning, the house was still quiet, as it always was. Ella still woke up asking for pancakes. Sunlight still spilled across the kitchen floor like honey. But inside Claire, the world had shifted on its axis. She came downstairs with Adrian, hair slightly messy, heart still soft. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in his life. Ella ran over and hugged Claire's legs, then looked up at Adrian with bright eyes. Alex, did you read a story last night? Adrian paused, a rare flicker of awkwardness in a man like him. Then he bent down, his voice solemn, like he was promising a business deal. Tonight I'll read. I owe you. Ella giggled as if it were the best thing in the world. Claire watched it and felt her throat tighten again. That night, they kept the promise. Ella lay between them, blanket pulled up to her chin, eyes wide like marbles. Claire held the book, but Adrian was the one who read, switching voices in a clumsy way that was strangely adorable. At one point, he made the wolf's voice too serious. Ella burst out laughing, and Claire laughed too. Laughed until she leaned her head back against the headboard like she might melt. When Ella fell asleep, Claire tucked the blanket around her and went into the kitchen. Adrian followed, not following exactly, but because now they had a quiet kind of togetherness. The kitchen was bright. Dirty dishes sat in the sink. Claire moved to wash them, but Adrian had already rolled up his sleeves. He stepped into place, turned on the water, and picked up the sponge as if it were a weapon he needed to learn to use. Claire leaned against the counter, watching him like he wasn't real. A crime boss does dishes? Adrian glanced over, the faintest tilt at the corner of his mouth. I'm learning how to be a husband. Claire let out a small laugh, small but warm, spreading through the kitchen like steam. She stepped beside him and handed him another plate, a moment so ordinary that if anyone saw it, they wouldn't see what they'd survived. Church, Ryan, threats, contracts. They'd only see a man washing dishes and a woman beside him, resting her forehead on his shoulder like a habit she'd only just learned. Adrian stilled, then leaned his head lightly into her hair, a touch so small it felt like a question without words. Claire gave a quiet yeah in her throat. And then, when everything was calm, Adrian turned off the water, dried his hands, and faced Claire with a seriousness that was unfamiliar. Not the seriousness of a boss, the seriousness of a man about to ask for something that mattered. Tomorrow, Adrian said, I want to do something. Claire looked up. What? Adrian didn't answer right away. He walked toward the hallway leading to Ella's room. Claire followed, her heart suddenly beating faster, because she could see it in his steps, a decision he'd been weighing for a long time. They entered the purple room. Ella was sitting up in bed, yawning and hugging her stuffed unicorn. Mommy? It's okay, sweetheart, Claire said softly. Alex just wants to say something. Adrian moved closer, but instead of looking at Claire first, he knelt in front of Ella. The gesture stopped Claire cold. A crime boss, the man who had walked into a church like darkness, now kneeling before a child, eyes serious but warm, voice low and soft as a pillow. Ella, Adrian said, I want to ask permission. Ella blinked. Permission for what? Adrian looked straight at her like she mattered as much as any adult in the room. Permission to become family. Ella looked at Claire, then back at Adrian, thinking with exaggerated seriousness, and Claire understood immediately. This wasn't a flashy proposal. This was the deepest kind of asking. Asking the one thing Claire protected most. Ella asked, innocent and sharp as a needle, Will you make Mommy cry? Adrian answered without blinking. No. Will you listen to Mommy? Adrian nodded. Yes. Will you stay? Ella asked next, her voice going smaller, like she'd touched a fear she didn't have a name for. Adrian took a deep breath, then said slowly, I'll stay, but I'll also respect it if one day Mommy needs to choose. Family is choosing each other every day. Ella was quiet for a beat, then lifted her hand and touched Adrian's cheek, very gently, like a seal. Okay, then yes. Claire stood behind them, tears spilling before she could hide them. Adrian didn't turn around right away. He simply bowed his head to Ella as a thank you. Then finally he stood and looked at Claire, his gaze so deep she could feel the proposal he hadn't spoken yet living inside it. And Claire knew, if he had knelt for Ella first, then the day he knelt for her, it wouldn't be to keep her. It would be to ask her to make a proper choice. 1 year later, Claire stood in front of the mirror in the hospital locker room, fastening her name badge to the chest of her scrubs like she was fastening something back into place in her life. Claire Karpenko, RN. Adrian's last name sat there. Not like a stamp of power, but like a choice she'd walked to on her own 2 feet. She studied herself in the mirror, hair pulled back neatly, eyes clear, shoulders no longer hunched from worrying about prescription money or the electric bill. She hadn't become the crime boss's wife to be rescued. She had become a woman with a career, a voice, a life, and a love mature enough not to require her to disappear. On graduation day, Claire finished at the top. She stood on stage, accepted her diploma to applause. Sophie sat below, crying before Claire did. Jade, now the kind of best friend who roasts you to keep you warm, leaned over and whispered, See? You married a crime boss, and you're still the one making the rules in that house. Claire laughed, eyes stinging. Because it was true. From that day on in the big house, no one gave Claire orders. No one dared touch Ella without her nod. Ella's schedule was still Claire's call, and Adrian, the man who once walked into a church like darkness, was the one who enforced those rules the most. Ella grew up healthy and happy, with a real childhood, swimming in the pool, running through the garden, tea parties with stuffed animals, and a reading corner where she made Adrian do a ridiculous voice for the dinosaur who could cook. One night, Claire came home late and found her father and daughter sticking stickers onto a poster titled Family Rules, written by Ella herself. Mommy is always right. If Mommy isn't sure, ask Mommy. Alex has to do the dishes if he makes a mess. Adrian stood there with his sleeves rolled up, face serious, tape in hand like he was handling the biggest deal of his life. When he saw Claire, he only said, "Boss's orders." Claire laughed until she felt tired. And those laughs, those ordinary, everyday laughs, were proof she wasn't living in survival mode anymore. Ryan didn't disappear into the dark with a gunshot. He was handled by the law, exactly as Claire demanded, exactly as Adrian promised. The lawyers did the work. The financial evidence was airtight. The networks were dragged into the light. The extortion, the threats, the stalking. All of it became paperwork, became charges, became a price Ryan had to pay in months and years behind steel doors. No blood, no scene for Ella to witness. Sophie could finally breathe again. One evening, Sophie sat with Claire on the back steps, the two of them drinking tea like they used to before their lives turned onto this strange road. Sophie looked at Claire for a long time, then said softly, "I still can't believe. I survived, and I'm happy." Claire touched her sister's hand. "Me neither." Sophie smiled, tears shining. "But I believe Adrian, not because he's scary, because he keeps his word." Claire looked through the kitchen window where Adrian was wiping down the counter. Ella sat on her tall chair, pointing and ordering, "That spot too." Adrian obeyed like a loyal soldier. Claire understood something simple. Some men are strong because they make the world afraid, and some men are stronger because they make the woman beside them no longer need to be afraid. The second proposal happened on a summer night. No church, no huge crowd. No one was looking at Claire like she was something to judge. No more abandoned bride from a year ago. Just the backyard. Warm string lights hung in the trees. The wind carried the scent of grass, and a small table held 2 juice cups for Ella and a glass of wine for Claire, like respect for the ordinary habits of their life. Claire thought it was just a family dinner, until Ella ran up, both hands clutching a small velvet box, her face solemn like she was conducting a national ceremony. "Mommy," Ella said formally, then turned to Adrian with bright eyes. "Papa Alex, this time we're getting married for love, okay?" Claire stopped. Her heart beat so fast she could hear it. She looked at Adrian. He stood a few steps away. No suit, no bodyguards, just a simple shirt and eyes deep as night, but without darkness. Only the peace of a man who had learned how to love without taking. Adrian walked over and knelt, but he didn't rush to touch Claire. He held his hand out to Ella first, as if asking for permission one more time. "Thank you," Adrian said warmly. "You helped your dad with something important." Ella nodded hard, then ran to hide behind Sophie and Jade, laughing, leaving a clear space between the two adults. Adrian looked up at Claire. "Claire," he said, no speech, no performance. "That day I walked into the church to fix what Ryan broke. But you fixed me, piece by piece." Claire wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to say, "Don't say that," but her throat tightened. Adrian opened the ring box. The ring wasn't flashy, just softly bright under the golden lights, like a promise that didn't need to shout. "You don't owe me," Adrian said. "You don't belong to me. You belong to yourself." Claire blinked, tears spilling. "And because of that," Adrian continued, "I want you to choose me again. Freely, clearly, no pressure." Claire laughed through her tears. "You're proposing and still giving me an exit?" Adrian laughed too, a rare, real laugh. "Habit." Claire wiped her tears. Then she looked at Ella, hands over her face, waiting like she was watching a movie. Looked at Sophie, crying while trying to smile. looked at Jade, shaking her head like, "Girl, you really rescued a crime boss." And Claire looked back at Adrian. This man had once held the whole world in his hands, yet learned to hold her hand gently if he was afraid of hurting her. He had power enough to silence a room, yet chose to ask, "Is this okay?" before a kiss. He had ways to solve problems with violence, yet chose the law because she asked. Claire understood. Real love isn't something that steals your freedom. Real love is what makes you safe enough to be yourself. She nodded, still laughing, still crying. "Yes!" Ella screamed, "Yay!" and launched herself at Adrian's legs, then wrapped Claire too, three of them tangled into one warm knot beneath the backyard lights. Adrian held both mother and daughter tight, but not as if he were keeping them. He held them as if blocking the wind. Then he bent down and murmured into Claire's hair, soft enough for only her to hear. "From beginning to end, you were always the one holding the key." Claire closed her eyes, rested her forehead against his shoulder, and smiled like a breath. 5 years later, the house gained a new cry, a baby boy. Ella became both big sister and commander, running the home like a lovable little general. Claire worked busy shifts, but every time she came home, there was a hand taking her bag, a hot meal waiting, and a man who knew how to say, "Go rest, I've got this." Adrian was still Adrian, terrifying to bad men, cold as steel to anyone who tried to break his family. But to Claire, he was the man who did the dishes without complaining, read stories until his voice went hoarse, and still asked every night, "Are you okay?" A reminder that respect isn't just the beginning stage, it's the foundation. And Claire, the wife who was never a prisoner, sat on the porch holding her baby boy, watching Ella laugh in the garden, watching Adrian walk over with a light jacket and drape it over her shoulders like he was placing an entire lifetime of peace there. No captivity, no control, only companionship.